It's been almost 3 years since I've done a really big shop project, and I think that means I'm due and I finally have the right project in mind. For a while, I've been thinking about how to build my perfect workbench. Something that can handle cutting materials, joinery, assembly, sanding, power, dust collection, work holding. Oh, and also have tons of storage that can be customized and changed at any time. So buckle up because I'm throwing down the gauntlet. I'm challenging myself to do whatever I can to build the ultimate, the final boss level, the very last workbench that I'll ever need to build from start to finish, and it all starts right now. So I think a lot of people have their own ideas about what workbench is ideal for their shop. Some people like going with the traditional workbench, solid wood, lots of vices, and great functionality. And I have a decent collection of hand tools, but I would rather use all my fancy modern power tools to build projects and save the hand tools for finessing a joint or adding small details. Traditional benches do use dog holes, which I love, but I also appreciate some aspects of having T-track, so a hybrid workbench is going to work best for me. Also, like a traditional bench, I want this thing to have a lot of mass and be very sturdy, just like my outfeed table. And it would be nice if it matched the look of that as closely as possible. So that means I'm going to go back to using hard maple to construct the frame of the workbench. The legs will be built out of 8-quarter boards, and all the aprons and support pieces will be 5-quarter boards. The reason for the 5-quarter boards is so when I'm done milling them, all my parts are going to be exactly 1 inch thick. I think 1 inch is very good for hardwoods like this maple, but if you're going to go with something less dense, then maybe bump that up to 1.5 inches, especially on the long apron pieces. And as I was thinking about other people potentially recreating this design in their own shops, I made sure to make all the frame parts 3.5 inches wide. That way, if hard maple's not an option because of cost or availability, you can go with something as cheap as 2x4s to make this and not have to change any of the dimensions to compensate. Once everything is ripped to rough width, I'm going to give them a couple quick swipes across the joiner to flatten one face and square up one edge. By the way, if you don't have the milling equipment and you're using pre-surfaced lumber, just make sure that all your cut parts are as straight and flat as possible. And why in the world is my dust collection hose moving like that? So strange. Anyways, as I was saying, when building the frame of this workbench, it's going to be crucial that everything go together as squarely as possible. This thing is going to be 7 feet long and 42 inches high, so if I'm out of square even by a little bit, that's going to translate into being out of square by a decent amount on the other end. So parts need to be straight, flat, and squared up from the get-go. Okay, the leg parts are going to be glued up out of 8-quarter boards. An 8-quarter is just a fancy way of saying 2 inches, and 2 inches is a fancy way of saying 5.08 centimeters. And I have no clue how much that is in Celsius. That's Celsius the measurement, not the occasionally alcohol-spiked energy drink. I'm going to glue up all these legs using one set of clamps, almost like one big cutting board. But unlike a cutting board, I need to make sure not to get glue between one leg and the next one. These legs are already going to be beefy enough as it is. So concentration is critical. Don't go drinking any of that special Celsius before doing this glue up. And once the glue dries on those legs, I'm going to run them across the joiner just to clean up that joint and reestablish flat and square sides. Then all I've got to do is trim that leg to length and these are good to go. So for joinery on the frame, I'm going to rely on my domino just like I did for my outfeed table. The one thing that I remember about building that project is that the assembly of the frame was a very hectic and stressful process. It's all fun and games until you have to assemble a 5-foot by 6-foot table by yourself. But having the joinery be so simple allows me to focus my attention more so on keeping everything square, because the joints themselves can be knocked together with a mallet. And as ridiculed as the domino is for being expensive and unnecessary, the efficiency and accuracy are just undeniable. Having all my frame parts be the exact same width and then using these reference pins to make the mortises in the exact same location on each side takes a lot of the guesswork out of making sure everything's laid out correctly and is going to go together how I plan. But there's a lot of ways to do this accurately. The efficiency is what matters so much because this frame alone has 128 individual mortises, and building the frame is just the first part of this whole project. And of course, there are other ways to do this. For instance, you could substitute in 1/2-inch dowels, but you need 2 dowels to roughly equal the same glue surface area as a single 12mm domino. So now you're on the hook for like 256 dowel holes. However, all that efficiency that I gain using the domino could be thrown out the window if I make a silly mistake like messing up the location of the mortises on the legs. So before I assemble any type of table or bench, I always take a couple minutes to set up the legs in the orientation that I want them to be in the finished project. I take a look at the grain and the location of the glue joints to get it looking as good as possible. And once I have them the way that I want, I like to add little tick marks to tell me which end is the top and also which faces get the joinery. And this ain't rocket science. Something as simple as this little mark tells me that the faces that line touches are the ones that get the joinery. And it's just little things like this that go a long way in preventing a mistake that would cause me to have to remake one or more parts. Besides the outside legs, there are also 2 center legs on this workbench, but those aren't getting mortises. Instead, I'm cutting notches in the top and bottom to support the long apron pieces. I wanted to keep those apron pieces in one solid unbroken span, and the center leg's job is just going to be to prevent that from ever sagging in the middle, which I do think is less likely than if I cut that apron in half and added more joints. But even with all the planning, fancy tools, and little tricks to help prevent making mistakes, this fool can still figure out a way to screw it up. Alright, so here's my word of caution for this video. Make sure to reset the plunge depth of the domino before you move from the legs to the aprons. Otherwise, you might turn your apron into Swiss cheese like I did. So I'm either going to have to plug that or just leave it there as a reminder of not doing that again. So at least I'm recording this and you don't have to make that mistake. And one thing that would be way easier to do right now is add the leveling feet to the legs. I just mark the center location of the legs and then use my portable drill guide to drill a hole for the leveling insert. This is going to help keep the hole nice and straight as I drill, and this is just one example of why a lot of woodworkers find drill guides more useful versus having a drill press in their shop, because in this case, it's just so much easier to take the tool to the workpiece and still get perfectly vertical holes. The one that I like to use is by UJK, which is the one that I typically recommend, but there are other cheaper brands that aren't quite as nice as this one, but still get the job done. All right, so before I begin assembling this, there is one thing I just realized I should do right now because it's going to be way easier, and that is to add dog holes to the legs. I'm going to be adding 20mm dog holes every 4 inches. I'm going to go with 6. I don't know if that's the right number, but it seems good to me. And in a stunning reversal of opinion, because why not make an argument for both sides fairly, I think this is actually a great task to tackle with my drill press. I have 48 20mm holes to drill in the sides of these legs, and with a Forstner bit that large going into hard maple, it's just going to be way more efficient to do that with the power of a drill press. Sure, I could do this with my drill guide, but I'm using the drill press for the same reason that I chose to use the domino over the doweling jig. It's just faster and easier for this task. If there's a lesson here, it's just don't get caught up in which tool is the best, just use the best tool you have for the job. Also, look at the fit of these dog holes. Ooh, that's satisfying. All right, so I have all of my leg parts and my apron and support structure all cut to size and all of the joinery done. Now all I got to do is grab a bottle of glue, a mallet, and slap this thing together. But before I can do that, I got to get rid of the old bench because otherwise I don't have a place to build this. Ah, the old workbench. What can I say? Well, it kind of sucked. Oh, the MFTs are great, but fastening 2 MFTs together like this is not ideal because it creates this huge trench right in the middle that's always snagging power cords, dust hoses, and furniture legs. And really, this whole workbench is a bit of a Frankenstein's monster. Okay, well, maybe it's not an abomination, but it definitely could have been a lot better had it been designed for the thing that it was actually being used as. For starters, it's a repurposed piece of shop furniture originally meant for something completely different, so it wasted a lot of storage space underneath. And the original drawers are all really small because they were made to hold a completely different type of item than what I have in here now. And besides the issues that it created in my workflow, whenever viewers would ask how I built it or if I have plans available for it, I'd have to admit that it was never meant to be a workbench, and I wouldn't make plans for something that I didn't actually like using. And that there ends the tale of why I'm making this workbench video. And now comes the payoff. All that upfront planning and making sure everything is just right. Now, all I have to do is bang this thing together, right? Well, not so fast. This is still a huge glue up, but I think I have a solid plan for minimizing the craziness. Most of the glue joints on this frame run from front to back across this short side of the workbench. So what I'm going to do first is fully assemble the long sides and let that glue cure up just enough to be able to handle them without clamps. And by the way, this is a great time to go ahead and check for square and use a clamp across the diagonals if you need to get everything just right before clamping it up. For really long glue ups like this, my pipe clamps are actually the best choice. It's just so easy to link pipes together and then build super long clamps that still get enough clamping pressure to bow this hard maple. These long 12mm dominoes can take a decent amount of force to fully close up that joint once the wood begins to swell from the water in the glue. Just make sure to back off that clamping pressure once the joint is fully seated, because you don't really need all that force just to keep the joint tight. After just about an hour or so in the clamps, the glue is going to be cured enough to handle and not worry about this coming out of square. Then I can add the center support legs by marking the locations with a pencil line just to make sure everything is nice and centered, and this is just going to get glued into place with clamps until it's dry. Okay, the next part of my plan is going to be to lay out the long side on the ground with the domino mortises facing up. And that kind of creates a stress-free way to add all of the side aprons and support pieces in place. I can really take my time to make sure that I get them all fully seated and make sure each one is square to the legs. But I can't take too much time here because I still have to get this whole thing assembled and in the clamps before that glue cures up too much to fully tighten all the joints. So, take your time, but hurry up. And I found adding a board under these unsupported areas allowed me to really bang these dominoes in place without a lot of bouncing around, especially when tapping on the center supports. And really, once I got in the groove with this whole part of the process, the glue up took maybe 15 minutes max, which is well under the cure time of the glue. But any comfort that I felt in having gotten this far was about to disappear, because now comes by far the hardest part of this entire project. Me, myself, and I need to lift the other long side into place and match up 24 separate dominoes with 24 mortises, methodically making sure one joint was started while a neighboring joint was still not lined up, which was kind of like a game of whack-a-mole, because getting one joint a little too far in place would knock another one back out. And so I kind of just had to work each joint down a little bit at a time until everything was fully seated. And all this was going on while that clock was ticking down on those bottom glue joints, getting it too seized up. Now to just muscle this thing over without pulling everything apart, and down we go. That didn't hurt too bad. And really quickly, I'm going to go ahead and do a check for squareness by going corner to corner across the top.
96 and 5/16. I can't believe that's so square. Wow. Nice.
Now I got to get this thing in the clamps. Lots of clamps, and pray that all these joints still tighten up.
It's together.
And fortunately, what did I spot but a lot of fresh glue squeeze out, so it looks like I made it with plenty of time to spare, and I even have time to clean up this glue before it dries. Well, I definitely think the hardest part of this project is now over, and with this nice sturdy frame build, it's time to start focusing on how I'm going to turn all that space into good storage. And I have a few options that I think are going to maximize that both now and in the future. What I really want is to create sort of a plug-and-play situation. Make an open storage area and then create different storage modules that can just slide in and out. And to start, I'm going to cut some more 3/4 inch plywood panels. I'm making 4 large panels and 4 smaller panels. The large panels are going to become the sides of the storage area, and they just drop into place between the legs and against the aprons. I'm using clamps here to hold them in place while I fasten them with screws to the aprons. And remember earlier when I said that the mortises in the legs were set just far enough back for a piece of plywood to fit inside? Well, this is why. Now these plywood panels are nice and flush with the legs. And the same thing's also going to be true on the inside with these panels. And next I need to cut some strips of my ply to make support pieces for the bottom panels. And here's the trick I use to install these. I actually got some 2-sided tape, and that's going to help me position the supports in place. That just makes it easier to bring in the clamp to really hold it there while I drive the screws. And unfortunately, the longer support strips weren't quite long enough to bridge the entire gap, but definitely good enough to do this job. I just used a second strip on top to kind of register that short end flush with the front support and then fasten it down. The most important thing here is that all of the support pieces need to be even with one another at the top. Otherwise, this isn't going to work the way that I want. That way I can drop in the bottom panel down into the recess, and this one has a nice tight fit exactly the way that I want it. With a little help from my persuader, the pieces fit right into place. And I don't know that this is entirely necessary, but I did go ahead and use screws to fasten the bottom panels down. My thinking is any added rigidity that this brings is just going to help prevent any sagging or racking of the bench in the future. I don't know if that's actually true, but it's nice to think that it is. I've never had a workbench with dog holes in the legs before, so of course now that I'm going to, I got busy trying to figure out what kind of work holding solutions I could come up with, and that process was made just so much easier by the sponsor of this video, Bamboo Labs, and their H2D printer. I wanted to start out pretty basic, so I printed up this long bench dog, which does a great job of supporting work up to 2 inches in thickness. Then I thought I should have something with a flat surface to support my work, and I went in and modeled this in my CAD software and printed it out all in a matter of about 45 minutes. This one can support 3/4 inch material, but it's still not quite everything I wanted, so I went back to my design and added a lip on the edge, and now this one will not only support my work, but keep it from slipping off and potentially damaging the piece. I just love the process of design iteration, which 3D printing makes so easy. But the H2D isn't just a simple 3D printer, it's a personal manufacturing hub, and I'm going to be sharing the other cool things that the H2D can do later in this video. So if you're a follower of my channel, you've seen me build a ton of cabinets and are very familiar with my methods. I actually think one of the great secret hacks of cabinet making is using pre-finished plywood. This stuff generally costs about $10 more per panel. In my personal opinion, the amount of money and time saved not having to apply finish myself is well worth the extra cost. And because I already have these nice plywood enclosures built into the workbench, I can save some money by building these cabinets a little differently than I normally would. I'm still going to have solid side panels because that just gives me a lot more flexibility in terms of what kind of storage I can use these for, but the rest is going to be a little more skeletal. Instead of a top, bottom, or back panel, I'm just going to use stretchers to keep everything nice, light, and structurally sound. Oh, and you might notice I also added shelf pin holes off camera. This is already going to be a long video and I wanted to keep things moving, but I do recommend adding these before you assemble your cabinets. It's just going to be a lot more convenient that way. These cabinets are going to be used to hold my Festool sustainers, and I have these specially made trays that I've owned for years, and so I'm going to go ahead and reuse those. They make getting tools in and out really easy. I made a total of 4 sustainer storage cabinets to line one side of the workbench, but you can make as many as you like, or don't make any if you don't want to. You could easily remove the sustainer trays and just add shelves to store things like glue, finishes, or whatever. I did make a second set of wider cabinets to go on the other side of the workbench, and these are going to be more traditional. One cabinet's going to have a bank of 4 drawers, and the other one's going to have pull-out trays, and that's going to give me easy access to larger or heavier tools that are just a little bit harder to store in traditional drawers. So what I have here is a drawer and a tray, and I build each one of these a little bit differently. I almost always build my drawers using pocket hole construction. I love pocket holes for this application. It's just so simple to take a couple of clamps and screw 4 sides together into a box that's very strong. There are a couple things to note though about these drawers. The back panel I always make a little bit shorter, and I'll show you why I do that in a minute, and the bottom panel fits inside of a groove and is made of 1/4 inch ply. All right, so my favorite trick for making drawers is when I'm doing the drawer bottoms, because that needs to sit in a groove that's 3/8 of an inch deep and a 1/2 inch up from the bottom of the drawer. So if you have one of these Jessam height gauges, you could do that really easily because this gauge can reference off the bottom of this plate or the top, and it's exactly 1/8 of an inch difference. So you've got 2 marks here. One I have set for 3/8 of an inch, one set for 1/2 an inch, and I basically just leave it set on this as default because I make so many drawers. But I can take this, set it on my blade, and raise it until it just kisses the bottom of that plate, then flip it on its side and bring the fence over until it just kisses the blade. Now I'm all set. I'm ready to cut. And all I have to do is run all my parts over the saw and create a groove just wide enough that the plywood bottom fits easily but doesn't fall out, and this is going to prevent it from rattling. And then once that's done, you can just slide the bottom panel into place from the back. And it's pretty easy to just button up the bottom with a couple of screws. Just make sure that you pre-drill these holes beforehand because we're dealing with thinner plywood here, and that's just going to be more prone to cracking and splitting if you don't. The trays, on the other hand, are built a little differently. So the bottom panel is going to be made out of the same material as the sides, which means I need to make a wider groove. And because the sides of the tray are also so shallow, I'm not going to be making the back of the tray shorter like I would with a regular drawer. Instead, I'm going to notch out some space for the drawer slides and then glue all 4 sides to the bottom of the tray. There's really not much room here for pocket holes, and there's also not going to be a front that's going to cover those pocket holes up, so glue and clamps is the way to go here. The only thing that's going to be the same between the trays and the drawers is that I'm using undermount drawer slides. Undermounts are just so nice, and installing drawers with these is just so much simpler. I just need to add these small catches to the underside of my drawers and then mount all the slides. Again, if you're a regular viewer of my channel, you probably know my favorite way to install any drawer slide, no matter what kind of slide it is. I start with a plywood spacer set to the height of the first slide. The spacer not only gives me a nice level place to set the slide on while I fasten it down, but it also guarantees that the mating slide on the opposite side perfectly matches it. Then I can cut that spacer down to the next set of slides and repeat that process. And if you want to know exactly how I determine the perfect location for each set of slides, I'll go ahead and link to a video that I made with an in-depth explanation down in the description. And now the absolute beauty of undermount slides is how easy it is to install the drawers. Just go ahead and set the drawer on those arms and push it back until you hear it click into place. It's that simple. And the trays, they install the exact same way. So with all the cabinets built, now's a great time to go ahead and dry fit everything together into the workbench just to make sure that there aren't any issues with the fit. I did notice that sliding in some of these smaller cabinets from the backside was a bit easier. They seemed to not get hung up on the cabinets next to them quite as much. I'm not going to fasten these into place yet or make drawer fronts for them because there's more work to be done down here before I do that, like adding pocket holes to the top of the sides and the supports. These are going to be used later to fasten the top of the workbench. I probably could have added these before I assembled this, but it's easy enough just to slap my Kreg jig on upside down and drill them this way. All right, so once you get the storage for the base figured out, you can throw a really simple top on here, maybe a couple of sheets of MDF, and you'd have a very solid workbench. But I'm not stopping there. I want this top to be every bit as functional as the base. In fact, I want that MFT functionality just without the MFTs, and I think I came up with a great way to get there. First, I need to make a subtop, and this is going to be kind of like the cookie on the bottom of an Oreo. I countersunk some 1/4-inch holes around the perimeter, and I cut this opening at one end. And to do this, I hit the easy button and did all the work on my CNC. I wanted to remove all the guesswork out of the exact placement of all these holes because that's critical for the next step. And this larger opening, I could have done that by drilling out 4 holes and then cutting out the opening with a jigsaw, but since I already had it on the CNC, it was way easier to just do it there. This is just another chance for me to opt for efficiency in order to manage my overall time spent on this really big project. And I'm going to attach that subtop to the base using all those pocket holes that I cut. Oh, hey there. And now I'm going to use another piece of MDF to make the top cookie on that Oreo. But this time I'm going to laminate the top, and I'm going to use a product made by Formica, you know, the company that makes kitchen countertops. This laminate has a matte black finish that doesn't reflect any light. Super nice when you're filming. And also, it doesn't take fingerprints. The product is called Phoenix, and it still has all the qualities of Formica, very durable, can take a beating, and you can get glue on it and it's not going to stick. And you can fasten it to the MDF the same way using contact cement. I just rolled out an even coat of cement on the MDF, and make sure you're taking all the proper precautions because this stuff is potent and it puts off a lot of fumes. Wear a respirator, open all the doors and windows that you can, and use a fan if you have one. I also roll out an even coat on the Phoenix as well, and then just wait 5 to 10 minutes for everything to get tacky. One thing to know about contact cement is that once 2 pieces that have been covered in this stuff come in contact with one another, they aren't separating ever again. And I don't want that to happen until I'm absolutely ready. So I'm just laying down some long spacer strips. Some of them are made from plywood scraps, others from hardwood scraps, And this stuff's not going to stick because it's not covered in any of that cement, and I'm going to use that to my advantage. I can lay my laminate on top, position it where I want, and then start removing spacers in the middle first. And I just press down on the laminate where that spacer was just to get it to start sticking. Next, I choose a side and pull the next spacer out and begin to evenly put pressure on the laminate using this pressure roller. And I'm going to keep going, removing one spacer at a time until I've completely rolled out one side. Now, I'm just going to go back to the other side and repeat that same process. This is not really hard at all once you know how to do it. So with the laminate now permanently attached, I'm going to go ahead and use a trim router to cut off all the excess around the edges and make the laminate flush with the side of the MDF, nice and clean.
And for all you ASMR folks, here's the biggest plastic peel ever.
And the next step is going to be adding all the features to the top, which means it's back to the CNC. I'm putting 180 dog holes in the top. Each one needs to be precisely placed in a grid pattern, just like an MFT. I could have used my UJK Parf Guide system to hand drill all these holes, which is what I did on my portable workbench, but my portable workbench only had 60 holes in it, and it took a couple hours to do. This is 180 holes. And combine the dog holes with the countersunk fastener holes, a cut strip, and this opening that matches the opening in the subtop, and all of a sudden a CNC makes much more sense for efficiency.
Okay, so now that I have the top and the bottom of this metaphorical Oreo, what's gonna be the delicious woodworking center? Well, so on an MFT, it's surrounded by aluminum extrusions on all four sides, and well, that's what I think I'm gonna try here.
I went ahead and picked up these rails from 80/20, and I think they're going to be perfect for this. Each one of these rails has T-tracks built into all four sides, and I'm going to use that to my advantage. These outer rails are going to be used for clamps like this. The only problem here is I can access the tracks from one side, but because of the way this goes together, I'm blocked from doing that from the other side. I'm hoping, though, that the solution to this is simple. Aluminum can be cut with woodworking tools, so I'm thinking, why can't I put a 1/2-inch router bit into my table and just route out an opening that I can slide my clamps into?
I admit that even though I know this is totally possible, it still made me a little nervous to make this cut with a router, so I started just nibbling a small amount to see how the bit responded. But it turned out to not be any problem at all, so I raised the bit to full depth to finish the cut.
All right, so my finger is going to represent the opposite side rail, and yes, woo, that is going to work just perfect.
Well, now that I know that this is going to work exactly the way I wanted it to, I just left that router bit at full depth and added these cutouts to the top and bottom tracks on both sides of the short end rails. Honestly, I am so glad that I attempted this because I'm definitely going to be using this trick again in the future if I need to. And if there's ever a time to wear safety glasses, it's doing this cut. I mean, I cannot imagine getting one of these sharp aluminum shavings in my eye. That seems like it would turn into a really bad day really fast. Well, now that I solved that problem, I can turn all these rails into a frame using these special connectors that 80/20 also sells. These are going to go into these counterbore holes and anchor into the tracks like this. Now I can just fasten that down using a hex driver, and that's pretty solid. But I don't want to build this entire frame just yet. Instead, I decided to fasten each of the rails to the top first. They make a special connector called a roll nut, and this literally does just that. It rolls into the track. And I'm going to use a flange head bolt on this, and that's just like having a bolt with a washer already built in. But instead of rolling each one of these nuts into the rails and then trying to blindly locate them like some kind of lunatic, a more clever way to do this is to pre-assemble the nut and the bolt to the top, leaving them a little bit loose, and then I can just slide that rail right over the nuts all in one shot. This is just so much easier to do this way, especially on the longer rails. And then I can go ahead and start mating up these corners with the anchor connectors. I really do think I'm going to like having this aluminum frame, which should not only give me a place to use clamps, but it's also going to go a long way to keeping the top really flat, acting exactly like a torsion box, but a lot easier to build. And once the last rail is roughly in place, I can go ahead and start tightening the anchor fasteners down, and it's really amazing how these joints get super strong and square right up when you do this.
I'm also checking to make sure that the rails meet up flush with one another on each of the ends, and this is just going to make sure that there's no interference when I go to use the workbench. And that's important because I ordered these rails to be the exact length of the worktop and the base, because when everything's assembled, I want it all to be flush and in line all the way up. And only once the frame is completely locked together and aligned with the base, I can go ahead and tighten up all those bolts holding the frame to the top. I decided to hand tighten these with a screwdriver just so that I didn't accidentally blow through the MDF. At this point, I really don't want to have to go back and remake anything that I ruined, because I'm really excited to get this workbench done so that I can begin testing it out. I saved the center support for last because not only does it have to be perfectly centered in the frame, but this nut has to be sitting precisely in the right position to line up with the holes in the top. And I have to make sure that's the case for every one of the nuts around the perimeter as well. The goal and the hope here is that when I slide the top into place, the holes in the top are going to line up perfectly over those nuts. That way I can just drop a bolt into place and right into that nut. A little bit of planning up front makes this assembly so much easier, and also a lot of fun to see everything line up in place perfectly. And here's a trick to use if one of those nuts didn't quite line up right. I just use an awl or anything really with a sharp point to drop in and pull that nut into the right position. And now one last final check to make sure that everything is nice and flush on all sides, and then I can go ahead and tighten down all these bolts, and oh man, this feels like such an accomplishment and a relief to get this whole top assembled. I'm really glad that I cut this out on the CNC, because I think that the precision of getting those hole locations exactly right made this go a lot better than it could have gone. All right, now that that's done, I can focus on the details of the top, starting with adding a little chamfer to each one of these dog holes, which I always suggest doing on any MFT top because it opens up a lot of cool options, one of which I'm going to be showing you. And while I'm at it, I'm going to go ahead and do the same thing to all the edges, which is just going to give this a much more finished look and also prevent those edges from getting chipped up. So one of the big questions I got when I built my outfeed table is how did I prevent sawdust and other small parts from falling through the dog holes? And I really wanted to think carefully about that in this bench design because the top is basically an aluminum frame sandwiched between two pieces of MDF. Anything that would fall through the holes would potentially get trapped inside there, which is why I strategically placed these cutouts in the bottom layer of MDF. If something does fall through the top, I can reach underneath into one of these openings and hopefully recover it. You should have seen the look on your face. Well, I guess that's one way to do it, but I also have these. I hopped onto Maker World and found these awesome little dog hole caps. What really caught my eye is this little recess in the bottom that allows you to press fit a nut inside. Now I can just use a magnet to pull the cap off the holes I want to use and the rest remain covered. So I immediately took advantage of the larger print bed on the H2D along with my other printers and printed out 180 of these caps. But I didn't stop there. I also printed this little magnet removal tool which has a recess in the bottom for the magnets. I just added a little dab of CA glue and dropped in the magnets. And I decided to personalize this using the laser function of the H2D printer to make a logo medallion for the top. Yes, that's right, a laser. I even printed a large one because, you know, I don't want to mess up this beautiful top with my drink. The H2D also has dual print nozzles, which makes multicolor or multi-material prints more seamless. For this bench dog design, I combined rigid PETG and soft TPU together to come up with a bench dog that had a cushioned and grippy top surface. Now I can raise my work off the bench and prevent it from sliding off the bench dogs due to that grippy surface. Well, so far I'm definitely impressed with this all-in-one DIY powerhouse and its ability to combine multiple manufacturing functions in one machine. The next thing that I want to do is add a 1/4-inch strip of MDF to this notch that I cut out, and this is going to be my sacrificial cutting area for whenever I use my track saw or a circular saw to cut sheet goods. I just went to the big box store and got a 2-foot by 4-foot piece of MDF. That way I can make a handful of these strips so that when one wears out, I can replace it with a brand new one. This is a box. It's got some vent holes, a dust port over here. To install the dust box, I just lifted it up through the cutout that I made in the bottom side, and the fit is just snug enough that the friction's going to hold it in place so that I can hop around to the top side and fasten it. I purposefully cut these elongated slots, and that's just going to give me the ability to adjust the position up and down until the top of the dust box just touches the bottom side of the work surface. And then I can go ahead and lock everything down. And while I'm in here, I need to go ahead and cut a matching hole in the side of my workbench that lines up perfectly with the dust port on the box. This was super easy to do with a hole saw. I just used the dust port as a guide to start the cut, but I only went deep enough for the drill bit to break through the other side, which lets me locate the hole precisely from the outside and finish the cut and prevent any blowout that might happen. And once again, with the help of my Bamboo Labs H2D, I printed out my very own custom dust port. Love this thing. That not only fits inside of this hole perfectly and allows me to fasten it into place with two hands, but it also has a quick connect fitting on the outside that just makes it so easy to hook up my dust collection to the workbench. Okay, so what's going to go inside this box? Well, you may have guessed what my first idea was already. This is definitely going to be a great place to put a router. And this surface is not perfect yet. It's still a little bit recessed, and that's because the grub screw inserts that I purchased to level this plate out haven't arrived in the mail yet.
Well, I lied. The grub screws just showed up. I just stuck a couple of MDF squares to the underside of the worktop using epoxy, and then I've got the inserts sunk into them, so now I can level my plates. And I haven't really decided yet whether I want to add T-track or a fence to this or just leave it the way that it is. I'm sure there are going to be a lot of modifications that I make to this bench once I really start to use it. The second option that I have for this is something that I've always wanted to build but just never built, and that's a downdraft table for sanding. I think this is going to enhance my dust collection while I'm sanding, but the suction does a good job also of holding my workpiece down to the table so it doesn't slide around on me. I also added a second hole directly below the dust box, and I popped a little grommet in there. I did this because I really want to add some onboard power inside this workbench and for some future ideas that I have. So I'm adding a power strip in here now, and that grommet gives me an easy way to connect it to power whenever I need it. And that's all I'm going to do with this space for now, so I can go ahead and fasten all my storage cabinets into place with screws and pop on my drawer fronts and my doors. So besides the traditional bench dogs and clamps, I really wanted to try vacuum work holding, and I found a company right here in the United States that makes a couple of really awesome products that I want to show you. These are called vacuum pods, and they come in a couple of different sizes. These have a single port on them, but they also make them with two ports so that you can chain these pods together. The setup's pretty simple, and I can secure these to the bench with dog holes like this or attach them vertically to the rails. And they also just launched a brand new base plate for the Grabo. Now I can just mount my Grabo right to the side of my bench, turn it on, and the base plate provides a non-porous surface that allows the Grabo to become an effective source of vacuum power for these pods. So I am definitely not a very trusting person when I'm running a router, especially when it comes to something that I can't physically see, but this pod is doing amazing. The workpiece isn't moving at all, and I'm able to get around all four sides of the pod. So I'm super pumped about this system. I think the pods and the Grabo base work great. It's a super simple system for somebody who's just getting into vacuum holding. The company is called Forged 3D. They're down in Atlanta, Georgia, and I'll leave some links down in the description to the things that I was using in this video. I also have all this beautiful unused space on the sides of the benches, and I'm going to employ the H2D to help me get this organized as well. So again, I headed over to Maker World, and I found this awesome little sander holster that fits my sander, and this is going to be great in case I need to pause during long sandings. I don't have to worry about where I'm going to set my sander down. I also wanted a place to keep my set of Temple Toolworks hand saws, and I decided to take advantage of magnets again, so I designed this magnetic toolbar that prints out on the large format of the H2D just fine, and now I can secure all these saws in one location. Well, that's it. Another big shop project in the books. I am so excited to start using this bench for projects. I hope that you guys enjoyed this video, and I'll see you next time.